Hey there, this is attorney Sarah Holmes of Holmes Business Law P.C. We are a business and trademark law firm that also offers general counsel subscription services to business owners. So one question that we get from clients is, I have a commercial lease, how do I get out of it? So the real fact is that getting out of a commercial lease can be very difficult. While most people in the past have rented some type of residential property, maybe you've had an apartment, maybe you rented a house, most people have not rented commercial property, and they are often surprised to learn that commercial property is very different than residential property. For example, in a residential lease, typically the landlord is responsible for all the maintenance of the property, they're responsible for the taxes, and it's very difficult to be evicted as a residential tenant. The landlord would typically have to take you to court, maybe even go through mediation and go through a pretty long process in order to evict you, because that property is your home and there's a public policy that, people should be in their homes and housed, and, public policy prohibits just randomly getting rid of people by evictions. Now, commercial property does not have the same type of public policy consideration. So, for example, the law views a business owner as a fairly sophisticated person, and if it's the place of business, they are bound to whatever they signed in the lease. So, on the commercial side, things are very different. For example, a commercial renter probably has to do all the maintenance for the building or the space that they're renting. It's likely that an eviction would be a very simple process, at least in Pennsylvania. It's often that there's something called a confession of judgment in a lease, where all the landlord has to do is take a piece of paper to court and file it, and then the tenant has waived all of their normal constitutional rights, such as a right to a hearing, a right to get an attorney, and the landlord's able to get an automatic judgment. Now, the problem really becomes, what type of judgment can that landlord get, and who is that judgment against? And this is where you have to take out your lease to see what the possible consequences of defaulting or getting out of your commercial lease would be. So one huge problem would be that if your personal name is on that lease, and or you signed a personal guarantee on the lease, which would normally be a separate document, some separate pages at the end. But look very carefully at what name is on the lease, and then at any possible personal guarantee. If your name is on the lease, you personally, not your business, or you and the business, and or you signed a personal guarantee, any type of judgment or any type of obligation for that rent may be against you personally. Now, hopefully you had a lawyer help you with the lease, and maybe they were able to limit that guarantee somehow. In that case, you would look at the guarantee, see what your limits of liability are, then you can make an intelligent decision as to what you want to do with your lease from there. If you didn't do any of that, you just signed a lease without getting any legal advice, then you may be upset to learn that you personally are on the hook for any potential judgment for the rent. Now, you also have to look at whether there's a confession of judgment that the landlord can get the property back right away, meaning they don't have to take you through an eviction court process, they don't have to sue you. Again, they just take a paper to court and file it, and they can get possession of the property back right away. So those are some consequences if you were thinking about defaulting on a commercial lease or you need to move out. Now, how do you get out of a lease? Well, one would be really think of what is the strategy here. The more that you are in a desirable space, the more that you might be paying below market rent, and the more that that landlord would really have no trouble finding a new tenant, the more they may be willing to negotiate an amicable exit with you, because they know they can rent the property and they might even be able to get more money for it. So in that case, they might not be super sad to see you go. The other thing you can do is think about negotiating an exit with the landlord. First thing you have to do, though, is really assess what is the total liability you're facing. So like I said, looking back at the lease, seeing if there's a personal guarantee, understanding whether it's you on the hook personally or it's your business or a combination of the two, and what's the maximum amount of money and the maximum amount of a judgment that you are potentially facing. That's going to give you the basis from which you want to go back and negotiate. So you could go to your landlord and say, hey, there's a year left on my lease. I would owe you, I don't know, we'll use a round number of $50,000 if I were to stay. However, you'll never get a judgment against me because I don't have any other money. My business is going bankrupt, or we're going to close the business. How about within 30 days, I give you a check for $15,000, or we go on a payment plan where you'll agree to accept some lower amount, and then we move on from there and sign a release. Sometimes you can negotiate some type of deal like that with your landlord, and then you would be limiting your liability and what you're on the hook for. Now, you really have to make sure that if you strike some type of deal like that with your landlord, you are going to live by it and abide by it and make those payments that you've set out for yourself. If you don't, it's likely that whatever settlement agreement you arranged also has some consequences where maybe now they can go back and get that judgment against you personally, which you don't want. So to get out of a lease, the first thing is pull that lease out and read it with a fine-tooth comb. If you don't know what it says or you didn't have a lawyer help you with it in the first place, now is the time to get a lawyer, have them help you interpret the lease, and then figure out what are your negotiating points from there. A commercial landlord typically does not have to do anything to help you out and help you get out of a lease. Sometimes there's some defenses you can raise if you've stopped paying rents, but commercial leases are usually pretty harsh towards their tenants. That's why it's super important to have some help on the front end with negotiating them in the first place. So, of course, if you have questions, you need help with a commercial lease, feel free to reach out to our office. Our number is 215-482-0285. Thanks.